We're live with Dr. J. Mitchell Perry. Today we're talking about Embrace the Obvious, 10 Foundation Steps to Common Sense. And here's Dr. J. Mitchell Perry.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Perry, and I'm very happy once again. This is live on Facebook and live on YouTube. And it's Friday, which means I've got a prepared subject matter for you. And as you are watching, I do encourage you to take some notes, or at the very least, if you have a question or a comment, I'm really keen to see the question and answer it. Or if you have a comment, please put a comment in there, because these programs that we're doing Tuesday mornings at something like 9 o'clock and Friday mornings, as right now, Pacific time, 9 o'clock, these are all for you. This is designed to help equip you with the states of mind, the belief structures, the way you look at reality, and equip you with a series of skills so your relationships, your performance, the quality of your life just keeps on incrementally going up. So all this material is for you. Therefore, we're particularly interested in, do you like it? Do you want more of that? Is there other subject matters that you like? Do you have some questions, some comments, all that good stuff? This is all for you. So subject matter today is called Embrace the Obvious, Practice Common Sense. Embrace the obvious, practice common sense. Now, please understand that an enormous amount of what I'm going to present to you now is going to be stuff you already know, because it's obvious. And so therefore, what's really curious about how people generally deal with their lives is invariably they do anything but common sense, and very often they are unable to see the obvious. So I'm going to walk you through what this is all about, walk you through what you may want to do about it, and then I'll walk you through about 10 different examples that you could practice if you really did want to practice more common sense. So let's begin with Embrace the Obvious. What I've learned as a clinician after many years of doing this is that this next conclusion seems to be amazingly ubiquitous, meaning there's an enormous population of people who, regardless of their background, regardless of where they live, regardless of the country they live in, what's really curious about being a human is that very often the obvious is generally right there in front of you. And the paradox is it's really hard to see what's right in front of your nose. Think about how often you have said something like this. Where are my keys? And then you check your pocket and you realize, oh my God, they're right there. Or you'll say, where are my glasses? And you'll realize they're on your head. Think about how many times you are absolutely perplexed or bewildered because what's right in front of your face, you're unable to see it. Has anybody, for example, ever suggested that you are defensive? You're being defensive. And what do you say? I'm not defensive. I'm fine. I'm fine. What's really curious is how often that which is right in front of your face is really difficult to see. So therefore, my recommendation is, if you really want to lead a highly productive life that really works well for you, that capitalizes on your strengths more than half the time, then I encourage you to make sure you look at what might be in front of your face. Sometimes you may have to get some help to say, could you remind me of what's perhaps right in front of my face? And part of the reason it's so hard to see what's right in front of your face is because you're so close to it. Very often everybody else can see what's obvious. On the other hand, if it has to do with you, it's very difficult to see it. So you must look, then you must find or discover the obvious, and then you got to learn how to do something about it. First, you got to look. You may get some help to look. Then you got to figure out what's exactly obvious. Then you want to do something about it. And I will walk you through all those steps on how you do just that. So here's some examples of the obvious. A lot of people do this. If you tend to be pessimistic and miserable, then how much time are you spending complaining, playing victim, and feeling sorry for yourself. You know people who are miserable most all the time, and they really want an audience, and they really want to talk about how upsetting everything is. And so notice you may get in the habit of doing that, and you're actually contributing through those habits to actually being miserable most of the time. How about this? If your business is doing poorly, how much are you actually contributing to poor customer service? Lots of businesses go out of business, particularly now during COVID-19. And if lots of businesses go out of business, very often you will say to yourself in normal times, well, the problem was the economy. When really, if a business goes out of business more than half the time, it's because the customer service stinks. That's kind of obvious. And yet, do we ever really take a look at customer service? Most of us would say customer service is extremely important. On the other hand, if it's extremely important, then how is it that whenever we get great customer service, we're actually surprised and delighted? So think about that, about the obvious. Here's another one. If your marriage is one where you feel emotionally malnourished, then how much are you actually withholding love, care, regard, attention, affection because you're emotionally malnourished? Single biggest reason, in my professional opinion, that marriages fail is that more than any other reason is that one or both people in the marriage are emotionally malnourished. The love, the care, the regard, the affection, the support, the respect, and all that extra mile stuff you did during courtship, somehow or another you stopped after the wedding. So if both of you are starving the marriage for emotional nourishment, then could that be obvious? My experience is you got to restore the courtship, which could be called common sense, in order to make the marriage work. So first off, here's a general strategic intent. A general strategic intent is ask yourself what's obvious here. And you may want to get some help. What's obvious? What seems to be right in front of your face? Then my recommendation is get some help if you need it. Most of the time, you're so close to it, it's really difficult to fix it or deal with it without help. So you may have to get some help, and that may be tough on your ego because, as you know, pride is very expensive. On the other hand, what happens if you're unable to deal with what's right in front of your face, or you're ill-equipped to deal with it and you need some extra help? So you do that too. Go get some help. And then learn how to do something about it. So back again to the Marines. Improvise, adapt, overcome. Figure out what are you going to do about it, or ask for some help to help you do something about it. So here's some examples of embracing the obvious. Let's start with your money. Money, by the way, is one of the two top reasons why marriages fail, because people start either without much money, or they complain about much money, or they invariably tangle over money. If you're concerned about your financial situation, you may want to realize the obvious. And the obvious is you very often are spending more than you make. Think about that. You're spending more than you make. So the obvious would be this. You make this much, and if you're really handling the obvious well, you spend this much. And yet, there's a colossal population of people out there that make this much, and they spend this much. And therefore, if they spend more than they make, of course, you've got an obvious problem, and you got to learn how to live within your means. And I understand how difficult that is. I've been broke when I started out. I've been broke, and I know what that's like. And having said that, it's a real good idea to practice common sense, which means if you're making this much, spend this much. That could be obvious. And yet, it's very hard to do it. Here's another one. If you notice that you spend a whole bunch of time complaining, whining, and feeling sorry for yourself, you may want to realize the obvious. If you're a somehow self-appointed professional victim, then you may want to realize the obvious, and that is you're spending too much time describing your problems rather than doing something about it. Let me do that again. If you're whining and complaining about how life is difficult and you are once again enjoying the delicious agony of life, then what you may want to do is realize you're spending too much time describing the problem when really you could spend a lot of energy and time actually figuring out a way to solve it. And therefore, maybe it's time to start taking responsibility for your circumstances, because if life is great, you did that. And if life stinks, you largely did that. And if life is a whole new level of underwhelming, you probably did that too. So therefore, how can you begin to take initiative to solve your problems and capitalize on your strengths, recover very quickly from setbacks? That could be called the obvious and common sense. Or how about this one? Your immaturity. It certainly appears that there's a colossal population of people in this country who are kicking and screaming and blaming and belly aching and somehow or another condemning everybody. I'm struck with how people now are so rude and disrespectful and blaming everybody. Apparently, it's always everybody else's fault. Now, is that everybody? No, that's just a lot of people out there that are perpetually finding a reason to blame them or that gender or that group or that race or whoever it is, or just blaming and blaming and blaming. It's always somebody else's fault. Well, if you are truly believing that the nature of how life is something to be criticized and you must blame those people, then could it be that you really might want to start thinking about the cards that are dealt? And it could be the obvious, could be common sense to start owning the cards that are dealt and then figuring out how to play them. What that means, figuring out how to adjust your contribution, your behavior, the way you conduct yourself, simply because you have a lot more control over your own behavior than you have over anybody else. Think about how often in a marriage, there's one partner in the marriage, or maybe both partners in the marriage, that's trying to fix each other. You ever tried to fix anybody? Tried to fix your spouse or fix your parent or fix your child? If you've ever tried to fix anybody, you'll notice when you are self-appointed to fix them, that's uphill. At best, it's uphill, because really the person who has to change is the person you see in the mirror. And when you change your behavior, they have to change. Sounds pretty obvious to me. It's just that most people want to keep on, certainly younger people, want to keep on blaming everybody else because it must be their fault, which is just completely counterproductive and a waste of energy. How about this one? Your self-concept. Let's suppose your self-concept is like many people's self-concept. I've treated tons of people with this one I'm going to describe to you right now. Weak, defective, undisciplined, lonely, unworthy, stupid, and unlovable. Think how often your self-concept is always somehow or another pointing out all your defects, all your holes instead of all your cheese. Swiss cheese. Well, if you're the sort of person that continually feels stupid, uneducated, unlovable, defective, anything like that, you'll notice that you very often have a behavior pattern that reinforces that. You give up before you start. Think about how often you do that. Oh, never mind. I could never be successful. They won't like it. I'll probably look stupid. All that stuff you will give up before you start, which means you keep on reinforcing the very self-concept that's counterproductive. So therefore, let's go back to more of the obvious. Think about this. Think about this. If it's common sense to know that regularly reinforcing and supporting other people will result in improved performance in business and certainly better quality relationships, then why is it in so many businesses the supervisors only deliver criticism and silence when it comes to trying to manage their people? Think about how often or how infrequently, how about this, supervisors deliver reinforcement. Likewise, if it's common sense to treat others with respect, question, is it common sense to treat others with respect? Then why are so many people rude, critical, contemptuous, and indifferent? That could be what's going on here. Here's another one. If it's common sense that great service will motivate customers to return and remain loyal, why is it that great customer service almost resembles anything but great customer service? As a matter of fact, when you get really great customer service, I'm guessing you are like me, and that is you're surprised. Wow, look at that. They behaved as if they actually cared. Think about that. You go to a supermarket and you say, "Where's the pasta?" Some people will say what one said to me a couple, 3 years ago. I said, "Where's the pasta?" And he said, "I don't know. Like, I don't work here very often." I thought, well, that was helpful. How about where's the pasta? Well, some people will say, I don't know, somewhere aisle 15, I think, check that. Or you may go to a really terrific place and you'll say, "Can you help me know where the pasta is?" And they'll say, "Certainly, I'll show you." Now think about it. I don't know, I don't work here, or 15, or let me take you to aisle 15. It's curious how great customer service is a relief, and yet it's so infrequent. Here's another one that's going on right now with COVID-19. As you know, the country is beginning the process of opening up with mixed reviews on the degree to which that's got a pretty good prognosis. Some people are saying, to the extent you can do social distancing a lot, and if you can stay home, because some of the experts are predicting that it's entirely possible the infection will spike because everybody's wandering around out in public again. So here we go. If the experts say, look, wear a mask on a regular basis and make sure you practice social distancing, and that could be called common sense, then how is it that there's these films, videos of people associating with each other without social distancing and without masks? I mean, think about that. Isn't that sort of playing with fire? That would be called common sense. So it's curious how often we somehow practice anything but common sense. So let's talk about that. Think about how often when you talk about anything in life to other people, you will say something like this: "Oh, come on, that's common sense. Everybody knows that." You ever heard people say that? "Oh, come on, smell the coffee. It's common sense." Well, what's really curious about that is that it's assumed that everybody knows what common sense is. My experience is that's true. Generally, everybody knows what common sense is. What's curious is there's some kind of a cerebral disconnect that happens with entirely too many people where they know what common sense is, and yet they abandon it and do something else. So if you just think about that, what is it that people are doing when they're failing to practice common sense? So now I'd like to give you a little physical thing I want you to do to help you remember what we're talking about here. I happen to be right-handed. So if I'm right-handed, that simply means that the hand that comes up faster and more frequently than the other hand is my right hand. It appears that more than half of everybody out there is right-handed, and yet there's plenty of data that would tell you that a left-handed person often is more creative. Having said that, that's a whole nother debate that you can have with your friends. So here's what I'd like you to do. Right now, raise your right hand and remember the following. Common sense is what you know. Raise your right hand. Common sense is what you know. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to put common sense right there in your dominant hand. If you can visualize that common sense is in your dominant hand, that means you're going to raise the hand that helps remind you of what you already know. Common sense is what you already know. There it is, right there in my dominant hand. So I'm going to put that hand up first, and therefore I'm going to remind myself through this association that common sense is right there in front of me. You already know it. Now, there are times in which you will behave consistent with common sense. You will, for example, wear a mask, or you'll do social distancing, or you'll pay your bills routinely, or you will be nice an extra mile, or you will take more responsibility for yourself, or eat healthy, or whatever it is. You'll do lots of things that reflect common sense, which is terrific. On the other hand, there are other things you do, often on a chronic basis, where whatever you're doing is void of common sense. Common sense sort of evaporates, and then you sort of do something else. What I'd like you to suggest to yourself, if this is common sense, Then, on the other hand, is what most people do when they're completely avoiding common sense. And what are they doing? They're practicing insanity. Now, if you think about insanity, you've heard this 1,000 times in your lifetime. What is insanity? Insanity is doing the same counterproductive habit with the same bad outcome, with the illusion that if you keep doing that bad habit, you're going to have a different outcome. Let me do it again. Insanity, you've heard this, doing the same counterproductive habit with the same bad outcome, with the illusion, if you keep doing that bad habit, you're going to have a different outcome. So let's examine what that might be. You could say, common sense says going to work, it's a real good idea to show up routinely and show up on time. Let's do that one. Show up routinely and show up on time. That could be called common sense. Yet, you know people who have real trouble with showing up on time, or they show up periodically, or they just didn't feel like it today, or something. So there's chronically responsible people who show up, common sense, and show up on time, pay the freight, go the distance, all that good stuff. Then there are other people who have real trouble with the concept of showing up or showing up on time. So they're over here in the insanity. So they're complaining about the fact they get entirely too little money, or they complain about the fact that, for example, they were disrespectful, or they didn't feel like it today, and they're therefore unreliable. So therefore, common sense is show up on time. Insanity is continuing to show up late or failing to show up at all, or having a bad attitude. That would be insanity. Now, if you think about that, the whole idea, if you want to practice common sense while you embrace the obvious, the whole idea is to remember, this is what I know. This is common sense. And if this is insanity, now the objective is to bring this insanity and replace it with common sense. Translated, to do what I know. If you want to be highly functional, then of course it would follow that the more you practice common sense, that's a good thing. Mike, are you there? I'll ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah, I'm here, Dr. Perry.
Okay, Mike, here we go. Synergistic questions. Number one, is common sense good?
Common sense is great.
Okay, next question. Is more common sense better than that?
Yes.
So therefore, living the lion's share of your life practicing common sense, would that be the best?
Definitely.
Okay, so therefore, if I'm knowing already what common sense is, and I got some insane habits that clearly are costing me either happiness or money or time or relationships or something, then the whole idea is now to practice what I know, so to replace the insanity with what I already know. That's the beauty. It's I already know it, now I just have to do it. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's sometimes we fail to do that.
Yeah, could we say it makes a lot of sense? It's common sense.
Definitely.
Is that entirely possible?
I just find that in moments like what we're dealing with now, with staying well at home and emotions are tough, you've talked a lot about that.
Yes.
Some people fail to have as much common sense because I think they're emotionally spun up.
To be sure, emotions determine and guide you to have sometimes very good methods of behavior, and other times when you get really spun up emotionally, then you start behaving badly. Absolutely correct. And we, of course, have to keep on learning how to manage emotions so you have a whole bunch of good ones and you recover very quickly from bad ones. You're absolutely correct. And so therefore, we may behave really badly, as a lot of people are now when they're out in public and they got rifles over their shoulder and they're protesting and kicking and screaming without masks and without social distancing. That could be called insane. So you're right. We get wrapped up in stuff and then we behave badly. You're absolutely right.
There's a comment here. It looks like people are noticing on the roads, people are driving a little more aggressively, it appears. And I think that may contribute as well to what you're talking about.
Well, it's certainly true. A whole bunch of your behavior is determined by your emotional state. And the good news is now there's a lot less cars on the road. gasoline is going down in terms of price, and gasoline usage is less. And it's actually had an effect upon air quality, which is good. The bad news is, as you know, people are losing their jobs, or they have less money, or they're unable to manage the kids and the job at the same time, or this is the new normal, and they're really frustrated with it. And remember, your emotions are your choice. In as much as you're convinced I can't control my emotions, yes, you can. If you think I can't, then you're going to prove yourself right. On the other hand, if you can say, whoa, hold the phone, let me pull myself together here, and I can choose to be miserable, I can choose to be happy, I can choose to be in charge, I can choose to be weak. Those are all within your choices. Now the question is, how do you actually master that control over your emotions so you behave better? I mean, that could be common sense. Does that sound right, Mike?
Yeah, that does sound right. Yes.
Exactly. So here are some insane behavior patterns for your entertainment. Here we go. Listen to, these are remarks that you've heard yourself or you've heard other people say over your lifetime, which clearly are a reflection of insanity. Hey, Mike, listen carefully. We've always done it that way. If only those people would change, then everything would be fine. They are the problem. They are the problem. I give them the answers, I tell them what to do, and then they don't do it. Would you say that's insane?
It sounds insane to me.
Yes, because there's this huge population of people who are condemning this group or that race or this gender or whatever it is, and it's always condemning somebody else rather than looking in the mirror and changing what you see in the mirror so you can contribute differently. Here's another one. I've heard this countless times. Of course, I nag my husband. He really dislikes it, but that's the only way I can get his attention. Besides, I'm not nagging him, I'm helping. You ever heard that one, Mike?
I've heard variations of that.
Exactly.
On TV shows and things. Yeah.
Exactly right. And it's bizarre that nagging or criticizing, whether it's a husband or a wife, and the whole notion is the more you criticize and bellyache at somebody, do they really want to say, thank you for that, I really appreciate that, I'll be better now? Does that really help?
Yeah, right.
Exactly. That's insane. Here's one. I get this from people all the time. I hate my job and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being so dependent on it, but I know I'll never get another job like this. So I'll just put in the time and I'll wait for it to be over. You ever heard people say that, Mike?
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the time.
And all they do is spiral downward and deteriorate with the illusion that once they finally retire, then they're going to be happy. Well, if you spend 20, 30 years with a job you hate and you keep on being miserable about it, and then you have the illusion you're going to be happy when you retire, well, I suppose it could happen. It's just more than half the time you're practicing misery during the life of your job. So it's relatively likely you're going to be really good at being miserable by the time you retire. That's insane. How about this? I love this. Our business would be so much more successful if it wasn't for those damn customers. You ever heard that, Mike?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense at all.
I know a lot of people treat customers with disrespect or contempt or indifference. As you know, Mike, I've traveled the world and worked all over the world in many, many countries, which means for 30 years or so, I was getting up every morning and going to the airport and flying somewhere and coming back several days later, which means I've flown on many, many air carriers. And there are some brands that I've flown on where I fully expect to be treated with indifference and contempt. And I'm sad to tell you that too many of those carriers are domestic carriers. And having said that, are there lots of airlines that I have yet to fly on? The answer is yes. On the other hand, I'm really rather struck when so many air carriers have people who work there who are treating us with indifference and contempt, especially when I'm sitting in first class. That just seems insane to me. Here's another one. Now, Mike, listen very carefully. Tell me, you'll love this one, Mike. Tell me if this is insane, and tell me if you've heard this out of parents. countless parents over many years when they say this to their children. Mike, now listen, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. You ever heard that?
Yes, I've heard that, and I'm afraid I may have said that too.
Yes, you have. So what's interesting is if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. Do you truly think the kids are going to say, oh, that's going to scare me into doing it? Or does your kids really say, okay, I'll take don't do it at all?
Yeah, right. Or just keep doing it the same way.
Exactly. I'm just struck how people say that stuff and then wonder why the kids are underdeveloped. So here's the deal. Once again, put common sense in your dominant hand. You know what common sense is. It's unlikely that you're ever going to have trouble knowing what it is. Most everybody knows what common sense is. What's curious is how often we practice insanity more than we practice common sense. So now, Mike, the idea is to do what you know. So let's go through 10 foundations of common sense. And if you would like to argue with me about any of these, you're certainly welcome to. I'm going to find it's going to be difficult to argue with this because it's common sense. And I'll help you. You help me right now, Mike. Number 1, spend less than you make. How much is that common sense?
That's entirely full of common sense, and a lot of people struggle with it.
Exactly. Somehow or another, they find a need to spend more than what they make, and then they're upside down financially. Let's do another one. Save money. Mike?
Important. So important. It's a cornerstone.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is most people, about 90, 95% of all grown-ups out there think that saving money is a good idea. And yet the research says that 80% of grown-ups out there are going to start saving money real soon, which means that there's a colossal population of people who never got around to saving money, and then they're wondering why they will whine and complain, I'm on a fixed income. Well, I wonder if you had spent, starting, let's say, adulthood, putting money aside, several decades go by, now you got a fair amount of money, so you can avoid complaining about the fact that you're on a fixed income. Let's do the next one. Mike, eat right and regularly exercise. Is that common sense?
Common sense. Also a challenge.
Yeah, it is. Unless, of course, you put exercise in the same capacity as brushing your teeth. Do you ever opt out of brushing your teeth, or do you brush your teeth routinely?
Routinely.
All right. So if you think about brushing your teeth, it's sort of irrelevant whether you brush it for several minutes or 1 minute. So, and rarely do you ever get concerned about how well you're brushing your teeth. So when you do brush your teeth, you're thinking about something else. Is that right?
Right.
All right. So therefore, if you gave exercise, some kind of exercise, the same status, there you could exercise for a minute or two. You could exercise for an hour or two. The point is, if you're doing it every day, then it's less important how long you do it or how well you do it. It's more important that you do it. Could that be common sense?
Common sense.
Next one here. Show respect, appreciation, and good manners. Would that be called common sense, Mike?
Common sense. Yes.
Yes. So if you're good at being nasty or cynical or disrespectful or indifferent, then you may want to take all that insanity stuff that's going to come around and bite you in the backside and now learn how to show respect and manners and good appreciation. How about this? Mike, take responsibility for your own behavior. Common sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And do most people do that?
No, a lot of people play victim. You've talked a lot about that on previous shows.
It's always apparently somebody else's fault. That's insane. How about do the maintenance on your health, the welfare of your children, your parents, and your friends. Do the maintenance on your health, the welfare of your children, your parents, and your friends. Common sense?
Yes.
Some people do that, and then some people come up with countless reasons why they're unable to. How about this one? Improve your character, contribute to society, and practice forgiveness. Common sense?
Yep.
Yep. Curious thing about character. It is one of the hardest things to change and improve if you do want to improve your own character. How about this one? Replace being a victim with adult behavior. Replace dependency with independence. Get educated, learn lessons, and be more proactive. Would that be all considered common sense, Mike?
Yes.
That one's hard. That takes practice to get unstuck from all that stuff. How about work smart, pay the freight, and go the extra mile? Would that be common sense?
Yes, it would.
Yeah. A lot of people have trouble with that one. Here's one. This is very popular. Replace black-white thinking with multiple options instead of either or, right, wrong, good, bad, win, lose, all, nothing thinking, which just makes people cranky. Now think in multiple options. Now, could that be a combination of common sense and the obvious, Mike?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And what's curious is how infrequently people do that. I still work with an enormous amount of clients all over the world. And one of the things I help them learn how to do, whether it's negotiating or closing the deal or reaching agreement or resolving conflict or improving your relationship with your spouse or your kids or something, if you really want to improve it, all you have to do is stop and replace this whole right, wrong, good, bad, win, lose, all, nothing thinking, and change it to multiple options, to 3 or more. And by the way, you and I have talked about that, and you had a win recently with your own son when you did that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. It helped tremendously. He's 6.5 years old, and he was spun up, and the 3 options really helped him select the option I wanted him to select. It was very good.
Yeah, and you were a combination of surprise that it was so simple. Does that sound right?
Exactly. It was smooth, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah. So I'm going to guess you're thinking, ooh, that's a good replacement from black-white thinking to common sense. Yes?
Definitely.
Excellent. So therefore, in summary, the following. Let me do this, Mike, and then I'll have some closing remarks. What in particular about today's conversation really got your attention?
I think there are foundations of common sense, and we fail to apply them on a regular basis. So improving that is really the focus and the key. And it's hard to do that. And so I struggle with some of these.
Yeah, because we're creatures of habit. And so therefore, for example, people who are highly angry and critical all the time keep practicing anger and criticism. And then they have trouble learning how to show some respect and some patience and some care, replace criticism with reinforcement, all of which seems to be blatantly obvious. And yet most of us are creatures of habit, which means in order to get the new habits to do what you know, if you want to do that, you got to do it long enough, kind of like playing the piano, so that after a while it starts sounding like music. Oh, by the way, that could be the obvious.
Exactly.
Practice does, in fact, make perfect. So my conclusion of today's material on embracing common sense, embracing the obvious, practicing common sense, my conclusion is the following. Think about how you live your life. Think about what's really going well. Think about what's poor. Think about the stuff that you think really could be improved. And think about what you could replace. Think about some of that insanity that you could replace with common sense. The great news is you already know common sense. Virtually everybody does. Now it's about doing what you know. Doing what you know. The more you practice common sense, the more you will notice that life will get better. And remember, common sense is often very uncommon. So in conclusion, Mike, concluding remarks here.
Yeah, Dr. Perry, I'd like you to go through the 10 foundations of common sense, starting from the top, rapid fire.
Okay.
And if that's okay.
Sure.
So we'll start from the top with the 10 foundations, rapid fire. What are the 10 foundations? And I'll call them out.
Okay, and by the way, Mike, what we may want to do is just tell people how to find us and how they can get a copy of all this, because all of this I wrote down in an article, the whole program. So we may want to do that too. Having said that, here are the 10 foundations of common sense. Now there are really dozens, and having said that, these are pretty obvious. 1, spend less than you make. Number 2, save money. Number 3, eat right, as in healthy, and exercise regularly. Show respect, appreciation, and good manners. Take responsibility for your own behavior. Number 6, do the maintenance on your health, the welfare of your children, your parents, and your friends. Number 7, improve your character, contribute to society, and practice forgiveness. That takes practice to do all that. And number 8 is replace being a victim with adult behavior. Replace dependency with independence. Replace being a victim. Get educated, learn the lessons about life, and be more proactive. Do more proaction than reaction. Number 9 is work smart, pay the freight, and go the extra mile. Work smart as opposed to just work hard. Work smart. Pay the freight, go the extra mile. And then number 10 is replace that black-white two-option polarizing thinking, right, wrong, good, bad, win, lose, all, nothing. Replace that with multiple options. Now, I encourage you to remember that a bunch of what you have probably thought as I've been speaking reminds you of what you already know. You're likely to be thinking to yourself, I know that. And the answer is, that's right. You do know that. The question is, how about you do that? What are your thoughts about doing what you know? The more you do it like that, the more common sense is going to reward you profoundly. Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Perry. And thank you, everyone, for listening. You can get more information at jmperry.com, and you can connect with Dr. Perry there.